Thank you, member. Member for Vancouver-Fairview.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you, members, for your recognition. I'd like to begin my remarks, first of all, by thanking the people of Vancouver-Fairview, the many constituents who have come to me over the many months since the last sitting to talk about the issues that are important to them, to talk about education, both the effects of underfunding of important programs in the education system on the quality of an education that they would like to see their children be able to have in order to fully take their place in both the community life of the province and the economic life of the province. They have also talked to me about their concerns about the economic future of the province. One of those concerns has been, are we putting too much store in one industry when so many of us work in other industries that play a very important role in the economic life of this province, and we're worried that we're not seizing the opportunities that exist there for us. In fact, many of them worry about whether their own jobs in these industries, these very viable industries, these uncontroversial industries, will actually be there for them as time goes on. Others have come and talked about the difficulties their families face with a lack of childcare, the challenges their graduating from high school children face trying to contemplate graduating after several years of post-secondary education if they're able to afford to go with an average debt of $30,000. These constituents, Honourable Speaker, have spent many hours speaking with me about their hopes, their aspirations, their concerns, and their desire that I represent their voice in this legislature, as I'm sure is the case for every member in this House on either side of the House. People have hopes, they have dreams, they have concerns, they have fears, and we must find a way to address those. Before I address the substance of the throne speech, I also want to pay respect to the number of staff who assist me and constituents on a daily basis. The staff in my constituency office, Jared Hagland, Ashley Fair, and Remick Lowe. The staff I've worked with directly, not just in research and communications, but the legislative assistants, first Jean Lawson, then Jared Butcher, and now Elena Banfield. Without their help, it's very difficult to address the many issues that face us all on a daily basis. Chair, let me now turn my thoughts to the throne speech and my words to the throne speech. And I've listened to the member from Richmond-Steveston, and I've listened to the member from Abbotsford Mission, and to some extent I have to say it's always, to some degree, a pleasure to listen to people's boundless optimism, even if I actually believe that optimism is somewhat baseless and actually bears a striking resemblance to a habit that our Premier has of finding out exactly what it is that people need to hear and want to hear to have faith in the future, telling them what they want to hear, and then doing whatever it is she wants to do, irrespective of whether it's good for the province and irrespective of whether it's reflective of a long-term vision. So I suppose, Honourable Speaker, that I could stand here and perhaps, although it's unlikely, say that I support the throne speech because of its direction. But I have to say, Honourable Speaker, how can one actually support a speech that by and large is filled with platitudes and devoid of substance, devoid of detail, largely devoid of fact, and certainly devoid of vision? If in fact, Honourable Speaker, we saw in the throne speech a roadmap for us to truly work together to create a diversified, well-grounded economy that supports jobs and investment and economic development in every sector, that does it in a way that benefits British Columbians, that does it in a way that is profoundly respectful of the rights of First Nations, that does it in a way that ensures that we leave a sound environmental future for our children and grandchildren, that would be a vision that I think members on both sides of this House could follow. But I don't see that vision in this throne speech. And I regret that I don't, just as my constituents regret that they don't. Honorable Speaker, close to a year and a half ago, we heard from the Premier promises during the election campaign, promises related to the future of British Columbia, promises that were all hinged on the development of liquid natural gas, promises of 100,000 jobs, promises of a $1 trillion economy, promises of a debt-free BC. Honorable Speaker, it is notable that unlike a few months ago, this throne speech moves back from those promises, minimizes those promises, is careful not to repeat those promises because, Honorable Speaker, there is little, if any, likelihood that those promises, the promises that led many British Columbians to vote for this government, will in fact be kept. Honorable Speaker, the throne speech talks about leadership. It talks about leadership from each and every one of you. For thousands of years in British Columbia, through countless other changes, one thing has remained constant. The land sustains us. If we continue to cherish it, if we continue to invest wisely, it will sustain our children and their children. Honorable Speaker, those are important words. They carry within them a clear message to British Columbians. They hark back to the importance of many values held by First Nations around this province, values that First Nations strive to maintain, to instill in their young people, values that I believe every generation of British Columbians must hold to. But, Honorable Speaker, it defies my credulity to hear these words from this government in this throne speech. For thousands of years in British Columbia, through countless other changes, one thing has remained constant. The land sustains this. Honorable Speaker, this is from a government and a premier who shortly after being voted leader of her party and premier of British Columbia made as one of her very first statements a comment repeated numerous times that a carefully thought out decision of an environmental process resulting from an environmental assessment process of the federal government, a federal government, Honorable Speaker, that no one in Canada really believes is a fierce defender of the environment. A decision that turned down a proposal by Taseko Mining for what was called the Prosperity Mine. She called it a dumb decision. She called it a dumb decision despite the fact, Honorable Speaker, despite the fact that the environmental assessment and the federal environment minister said that the proposal would cause serious and irreversible environmental damage, serious ecosystem damage. In fact, the federal environment minister said it threatened the entire ecosystem. Despite the fact, Honorable Speaker, that that proposal was found by the review to be profoundly out of step with the values and rights and traditional practices of the Chilcotin First Nation. Honorable Speaker, if the land sustains us and we are conscious of that, surely that would lead to respectful consideration of decisions by an environmental process, one that no one actually believed initially would turn down the mine. Surely, Honorable Speaker, it would lead to respect, it would lead to thought, it wouldn't lead to an off-the-cuff statement that it was a dumb decision because it stood in the way of development. Now, Honorable Speaker, I know the Premier likes to say repeatedly that we on this side of the House can't say yes to anything and don't believe in development. But, Honourable Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. What we believe in is setting up the conditions for development that British Columbians can believe in, that First Nations can believe in, that people can have faith in, and that will, in fact, lead to a richer investment climate because there will be certainty among investors that British Columbia is committed to getting it right, and they will not have to be dragged through the wringer of processes and processes being redone, and the lack of social license and all that that entails, and all of that brings in the way of economic uncertainty. Honourable Speaker, the throne speech says leadership means being consistent on economic development. Again, Honourable Speaker, for perhaps the first time in a year, I've heard from the throne speech and the Premier and members opposite many claims that work is being done on a diversified economy, that we're simply not putting all of our eggs in the LNG basket. But, Honourable Speaker, if that is the case, why have so many people who have spoken to so many MLAs from the business community sounded a caution that while LNG has potential for British Columbia if done right, it is wrong and dangerous to place all of our eggs in one basket and to neglect other sectors of the economy that are in fact doing well but could be doing better and could support many, many jobs. In fact, many, many, many more jobs than even the Premier's exaggerated claims that she is in fact no longer making with respect to the LNG industry. I will return to those in a moment. This throne speech is notable because it appears to back down on every major commitment that the Premier made during the election campaign. 100,000 jobs. Honourable Speaker, no one knows where those are going to come from. In fact, this government is scrambling to get approval for even one project. And it's not handling that very well because it's put all of its cards face up on the table, therefore putting itself in a terrible negotiating position. And we're seeing that play out in the media on a daily basis with statements from the CEO of Petronas that are aimed at reducing the value that British Columbians will get for this non-renewable resource that we own, that will drive down the return to British Columbians for this resource. On the issue of jobs, the Premier has claimed that this industry will provide many jobs for British Columbians, 100,000 jobs for British Columbians. Of course, British Columbians would welcome that. We would welcome that. People want jobs for British Columbians, but if the Premier wants jobs for British Columbians, she needs to do more than just tell British Columbians that she's going to create jobs and then turn around and sign quiet deals with the government of China to bring in temporary foreign workers to fill whatever jobs are in fact created in the liquid natural gas industry. We can do better in BC, we should do better in BC, and we will do better in BC. No debt in British Columbia. Honourable Speaker, frankly, given the likelihood of a very low royalty and tax regime at any time, and an even lower one until many, 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 many years have gone by, and the province and people of British Columbia have totally paid off the capital costs of the proponents of the LNG industry. Only then will we begin to see any significant returns. That will be a long time. In the meantime, Honourable Speaker, in the 3 short years that we have had the current Premier of British Columbia, we have seen our debt, our provincial debt, go down? Has it gone down, Honourable Speaker? No, it's gone up by almost a third. It's incredible. Say one thing, do another. Tell people what they want to hear, forget about the facts. Honorable Speaker, we deserve better in this legislature. British Columbians deserve better. We deserve a premier who respects everyone in this province, who has an honest conversation with everyone in this province about her economic proposals. And let me go on about that. Honorable Speaker, she has said that we will have the cleanest LNG in the world. She has said that it will be British Columbia's contribution to combating climate change. Honorable Speaker, if that is the case, why will she only talk about the emissions from liquid natural gas on the downstream end, and she won't talk about the emissions at the wellhead? She doesn't even want to count those emissions. We don't know what legislation we will see over the course of this session, Honorable Speaker, but there have been plenty of hints that there will be legislation to address the fact that, as the Minister of Environment said to a number of people at the Union of BC Municipalities, it will be hard enough to meet our legislated greenhouse gas emission targets. With LNG, it will be virtually impossible. Honorable Speaker, we need to have an honest conversation with British Columbians about the greenhouse gas emission implications of developing an LNG industry. Of course there will be emissions. And there are things that we can do that this government could insist on to limit those emissions. Or there are other things this government could do by public policy to drive down emissions in other areas of the economy and other areas of daily life. We on this side of the House suggested a number of those things during the election campaign. We would love the opportunity to work with British Columbians to actually implement those measures and to ensure that we actually do have the cleanest LNG industry in the world, or even come close to the cleanest LNG industry in the world. But instead, Honorable Speaker, what we get are words that claim one thing and actions that will do another. As Justine Hunter said in the Globe and Mail, can we have, or as she said, no matter how you dress it up on the accounting books, it remains a fossil fuel from the wellhead to the terminal. Do us a favor and let's have a straight conversation about it. A straight conversation, Honorable Speaker. The truth, an honest conversation with British Columbians, not just telling British Columbians the right words, but making and doing the right actions. Honorable Speaker, the next few months in British Columbia with respect to the liquid natural gas industry will be very interesting. We are seeing high-stakes negotiations. We are seeing power negotiations, and we are not seeing, frankly, Honorable Speaker, the government of British Columbia showing a lot of skill, a lot of experience, a lot of good strategy in negotiations. When you tell the people you're negotiating with that you have bet the whole farm and your neighbor's farm on this one industry, you are bargaining from a position of weakness, and Petronas and others will take full advantage of that. Let's have that honest conversation with British Columbians as well. Honorable Speaker, the throne speech talks about education and training and the Skills for Jobs blueprint. Honorable Speaker, as a member of the Finance Committee, I have heard in virtually every city in British Columbia in which we have held public hearings, representatives of college administrations, representatives of faculty associations, and very, very significantly, representatives of student associations talk about how difficult it is to access post-secondary education today in British Columbia unless you are very, very rich. That is not equitable access to public education. That is not going to build our economy by investing in our youth and ensuring they have the skills and the knowledge needed to participate in the economy, which will benefit all of us, including the provincial treasury. We have seen through this government's single-minded focus on balancing the budget, and the member from Abbotsford Mission referred to that. Well, Honourable Speaker, yes, one can balance the budget every year if one continues to cut and slash the services that British Columbians depend upon and not see so many of those services as an important investment in the economic future of our citizens, our province, and in fact of the provincial treasury. It's penny wise and pound foolish. Honourable Speaker, student after student came before us and talked about the crushing debt loads, the stress of trying to work full-time and complete their education, the non-completion rate, the stretching out of the education over many more years than people in my generation would have even considered. And this is because tuition has skyrocketed. British Columbia is the only province in Canada without an upfront needs-based student grant program, and we have the highest interest rate on student loans. What kind of education plan is that, Honourable Speaker? And why doesn't the throne speech talk about that and the challenges that that entails for British Columbians, that entails for our future, and that entails for young people? Honourable Speaker, we also heard in the Finance Committee significant concern about the Skills for Jobs blueprint that proposes to take 25% of existing post-secondary education funding and target it to specific needed skills. Honourable Speaker, nobody has any quarrel with ensuring that we are training for the needed skills in LNG and mining and in other industries. But Honourable Speaker, as Paul Renier, the Executive Director of the BCIT Faculty and Staff Association, wrote, quality post-secondary education is not a circus tent that can be put up or taken down overnight to move to the next one industry town. Honourable Speaker, we have already seen in the last several years many programs that are critical to different parts of British Columbia's economy shaved back, cut back, held back, in some cases eliminated, and when they're eliminated, Honourable Speaker, all of the infrastructure that supports them disappears, and it is difficult and very costly to build them back up again and to replace them. Honourable Speaker, that's a problem for all of us. And let me simply illustrate that point by talking about another industry that members opposite like to say is doing very well in BC, and it is a hugely important industry in British Columbia. It's film, television, and digital animation. And it did better, Honourable Speaker, in 2012-13 than it had in 2011-2012. But it's gone down in the number of productions in this year. And while some studios are doing well, a number of studio heads said to me very recently, we have about a 90-cent dollar and we're not at capacity. If we're not at capacity with a 90-cent dollar, there's something structurally wrong with the way we're supporting the industry. This government made a promise to extend a tax credit to post-production digital animation and visual effects. It may well be in the upcoming budget. I asked the Minister of Finance that question in estimates in the past session. But in the meantime, the ability of the industry to attract productions here by being able to support the full breadth of the production right down to post-production is compromised. And the ability of animation studios in my constituency, with whom I've met, to actually take on the contracts available to them with the skilled staff is hampered by the fact that we only graduate 24 students a year from the animation courses in the public post-secondary institution when they say they could hire the entire class tomorrow and still have a need, and more recently have had to contract out their work outside of British Columbia. Honourable Speaker, this is an existing industry. There are other existing industries. They provide many jobs. Film and television provides more jobs today than the oil and gas industry. The technology industry provides more jobs today than forestry, mining, oil and gas put together. Why, Honourable Speaker, other than passing mention that this is part of the job strategy, don't we see something concrete to build these industries up and create even more jobs for British Columbians and graduate the students that can fill these jobs in British Columbia, to stay in British Columbia, to build British Columbia for the future? Instead, we are pursuing, with a narrow-minded focus, one industry. One very hard to establish industry, apparently, because we're still waiting for the tax regime, we're still waiting for the investment decisions, and we're still waiting for a shovel to go into the ground. Honourable Speaker, the throne speech talks about mining, and it talks about, I'm going to quote here, and just like the people of Likely, this is talking about the people who were put out of work by the tailings pond breach in Mount Polley. And just like the people of Likely, they need to know they will not be abandoned. Honourable Speaker, I'm going to assume that the words that came from the Lieutenant Governor are the words that we are hearing from the government and the Premier. In fact, that's what they are. And if the people who work in the mining industry in British Columbia and the people of Likely who are living with the after effects of that environmental disaster are not to feel abandoned, perhaps the Premier would have liked to do something more than show up one day for a photo op and then disappear from Likely, not return, not answer any of the questions the people have about water and their economic future and fish, and pretend that nothing serious has happened and hide behind an investigation that is ongoing. Honourable Speaker, that inquiry is important, but reassuring the people of Likely by showing up on the ground is even more important, and the Premier has failed. She went to Likely, she said what people wanted to hear, and then she disappeared, Honourable Speaker, and did whatever she wanted. Honourable Speaker, it's just not good enough. Honourable Speaker, let me close my remarks by talking about an area that I believe is significantly important to British Columbia. It's the area of transportation. We have waited for close to 6 years for this government to follow through on the commitment it made in a memorandum of understanding with the mayors of the Metro Vancouver region to reach agreement on a funding formula to implement the much-needed rapid transit south of the Fraser on the completely overcrowded Broadway corridor, as well as to meet the needs of seniors with mobility issues and others with mobility issues through Handy Dart, and to add additional buses to existing service to meet the needs of a growing population. We are still waiting for that funding. Planned expansion of bus service hours have been put on hold by TransLink because there is no certainty that funding is coming. We're still waiting for the Transportation Minister and the Premier to do something other than say no to every single suggestion of funding put forward by the mayors. Honourable Speaker, it's not good enough, and it's not just us on this side who don't think it's good enough. The members opposite will be familiar with the current CEO of the Vancouver Board of Trade, Ian Black. Let me read his words. One of our organization's core beliefs is that our economy cannot thrive without the efficient, reliable, and safe movement of goods and people. Transportation is critical to our shared economic destiny. Tom Sire of the Business Council of British Columbia says that transportation will be critical to building the communities and businesses that will sustain the expected 1 million new residents and additional 600,000 jobs over the next 25 years. Honourable Speaker, it's time for the Minister of Transportation and the Premier to get on with the job and stop hiding behind a referendum. Let's fund transit and build the economy in British Columbia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, member.